They used to water switch. Yes. So they had the honey. And all of that had the honey used to go out to Harrods and
The village was not
All right, folks.
we were just through that. We were in Fritton, which is in Suffolk. That's my whole world. My life. The roads are like never straight to the road. Driving is quite fun.
If we get everybody's attention, if they're able to stay, we're grateful. The screen is over here. I'm in the way, of course, but what else is new? But anyway, so if you wanted to move over from the sides, if you can't quite get an angle, we can just pull chairs up at other people's tables. We are really grateful for Father Michael Bedford here at St. John's Church. I first met Father Bedford by way of a check from his parish in Redford. They voted to support some seminarians while I was in seminary, and they talked to Bishop Edward McBurney, my bishop from Quincy, and said, we have money for 3 worthy seminarians. And Bishop McBurney said, I don't think I have any, but I have needy seminarians. And so I received some money. And then fast forward years later, when I came here to St. John's, Father Bedford had retired and was helping out when Father Kim was here, and then helping when Father Leovi was here as the interim. And so we thought, what a great opportunity this would be. When he called me up and he said, I don't know, how do you feel about the idea of my coming and attending? Because, when you get a new priest, sometimes they don't want old baggage around. Thankfully, Father Mike was not old baggage. He was just older than I was. And so I said, well, Father, if you're going to come, the rubrics of the prayer book says that you have to receive communion first. So rather than run up and beat the choir to the altar rail, you might as well come up and help me. And he did that for many years at the altar, for which I'm very grateful. So anyway, Father Mike's got a presentation, a bit about his life, and so I'm going to turn the microphone over to Father Mike.
I apologize, I'm a little shaky today. I had a vertigo attack.
Oh, gosh.
And, I'm still a bit wobbly, but I'll try to keep it together. People wonder, how on earth did a young kid born in upstate New York get to be in the middle of the London Blitz? Those of you who don't remember what the London Blitz is, Germany tried to destroy London. Well, they missed. So, how did I get there? Well, start with my father. Dad up there. He's in Canadian uniform here. He was born in the Midlands in England, went to Canada as a young lad. He and his brother and the rest of his family followed. When the First World War started, the young lads in his family all joined up, and he wound up in England. He was wounded twice. Well, he went into the trenches in France. He was wounded twice. The second time they had to send him to England to recuperate. It was a very serious wound. But after he got out of the hospital in England, they gave him light guard duty. And when he was on duty, this young English girl rode by on her bicycle, and he thought, gee, this is an opportunity. How do I meet her? He's a clever lad. He picked a bunch of wildflowers. And, as she rode by one time, he says, excuse me, miss, but I'm from Canada. which was a barrel of baloney because he was from the Midlands of England, but he happened to be wearing a Canadian uniform. So anyway, she told him what the names of the flowers were, and eventually she took him home and fed him, of course, as you do with soldiers, and they fell in love. And when he went back to Canada with the Canadian Army, she followed him. Want to see what this she looked like? You got it? This is my mother when she was about 17 or 18 years old. I don't blame this Canadian lad for trying to get on good terms with her. Well, as the war ended, he went back to Canada, and my mother, at that time his girlfriend, followed him, and their family settled up in Ontario, just across the border along the St. Lawrence. And they were married. And of course, there were some children. There were 3 boys were born in Canada. But my parents wanted to be in America, so they crossed the St. Lawrence River and became Americans, and I was born. And that was the last of their children. I guess they figured having reached perfection. So after a while, they decided, gee, let's go back to England. Let's just pop across the Atlantic. So they found passage on an English liner called the Franconia, and sailed into Southampton Harbor first and then to London. And this picture is the picture of the 4 boys. This was our passport photo. This would have been in about October of '38. And there's the 4 of us. And when we got to England, we went to live where my mother had grown up as a young girl. And this is the house where I first stayed when I went to England. Well, what do we do with this boy? They decided to put me into a private boys' school. It was all boys. It was called the Harvey Grammar School. Now, grammar schools were very old schools in England, and this one was founded in 1674. This year, the school is celebrating its 350th anniversary. Whoa. And that's why I'm wearing the pin here to celebrate that. I went to that school for, almost 7 years. Started when I was 10, on January the 10th, 1939. This is the front of the modern school. This is not the old school. This is the modern school that was built. And the 2 charming men that you see in this next picture, the crusty old fellow on the left was Mr. Halford, our English teacher, and the studious fellow on the right was Mr. Emerson, our French master. We had no females in the school. There was one secretary to the headmaster. Her name was Miss Wind. So you can imagine what a bunch of boys did. They named her, or nicknamed her, as Break. what can I say?
10 seconds to see if the humor doesn't change. They're getting it in the back of here. It's trying to make it its way back.
Yeah, I see little man.
This next picture is me posing as an English schoolboy. School was very strict. School uniforms. Before my parents could put me in the school, they had to get me all kitted out. So starting with black leather shoes, wool socks with red and band top around them, short pants, gray pants. You didn't get long pants until you were about 12 or 13 years old. Then you have a gray jacket with a school emblem on it, and you have a school tie, and you have a school cap, and then you have to have a football outfit. Our football is what you call soccer. And we had, in the summertime, we had white uniforms. So it was very formal. Masters were called sir. If you wanted to speak, you stood and asked permission. It was a very interesting thing for a young lad like me. One of the big problems was the monetary system. Pounds, shillings, and pence. 11 pence to the shilling, 20 shillings to the pound. That doesn't sound too bad. But then you look at the coins, and you start off with a farthing, which was a quarter of a penny. Then you had a halfpenny, which was half a penny.
Yeah.
Then you had a penny. Then you had a threepenny bit, a threepenny bit. And to further confuse you, there were bronze threepenny bits and silver threepenny bits. And then you had sixpence, and then you had a shilling, and then you had 2 shillings, which was called a florin. Then you had 2.5 shillings, which was called a half a crown. And then you had 5 shillings, and that was called a crown. Then finally you get to paper money. Now try, as a 10-year-old, try multiplying 4 pounds, 6pence, farthing by 4, and it'll take you a long time. Things went along pretty well. We got a routine worked out. I lived about 2 miles away from the school. I had a bicycle. I got to school on the bicycle. And all kinds of weather, of course. Nobody had any cars. Before we went to America, we had 2 cars in the family. We got to England, we didn't have any, but we had a lot of bicycles. My mother and father all rode bicycles. The school fees were expensive, but after we'd been there a while, I managed to sit for an exam, and of about 40 boys, and I was one of 5 that won a scholarship. So the rest of my school days were paid for by the scholarship, which was a real break for my family. But the war was coming. Everybody in England knew the war was coming. They had, in some ways, been preparing for it. And this next picture is one of my two of my brothers and 2 of our cousins from London were staying with us on the 3rd of September in 1939. And we went for a walk, and while we were gone, the air raid sirens went off, and we found out that the king had just declared war on Germany, and France was with them. So immediately a lot of people panicked, thinking that as soon as the war began, the Germans would start bombing. But of course they didn't, but a lot of people left London for a short time, and then they went back. What were the preparations that had gone on? Well, first, everyone received an identity card. I have to smile when they talk about wanting to have people carry identification with them. They fuss about it here. Over there, you didn't get to fuss about it. You were just given one and like it. So I had an identity card, but we were Americans. We weren't British. Although my parents were both born over there, they had become naturalized Americans. So we were called aliens. So I was an alien. And I was given an alien's identity card, which was shutter with a photograph in it. I can imagine trying to give out aliens in this country with a photograph in. All kinds of preparations had been made. Everyone was issued a gas mask. During the First World War, the Germans had used gas. The British were afraid that Hitler would start using gas against them, so they equipped everyone with a gas mask. And this next picture, it's not a very good picture, but the person in the front is actually wearing a gas mask, and the clouds of smoke in the back they used to set off a smoke bomb every once in a while to test to see how many people were actually carrying their gas masks. We were supposed to have them with us at all times, that and your identity card. Well, the Germans never did use gas, but it was there just in case. The war, as I said, started on the 3rd of September, 1939. There was a large group of men called the Home Guard that were preparing to defend England if needed. The army was over in France fighting with the French army against the Germans. Bombing started from the German Air Force, and they seemed to take a particular dislike on London, and they really blasted London into what was called the Blitz. A lot of other things happened. For example, food shortages, believe it or not, started almost immediately, and so everyone was given a ration card. And what I'm showing there on the screen is a week's ration. 3 ounces of bacon or ham, 8 ounces of sugar, 2 ounces of tea, 1 shilling and tuppence worth of meat, then cheese, 2 ounces, 16 ounces of preserves and jams. The Brits like their sweets. Butter, 2 ounces, margarine, 4, lard, 2, and 12 ounces of a month of candy. But joy of joys, 1 egg a month. If you went to the grocery store and they didn't have any of the things in your list, the fact that you had your list didn't mean anything if they didn't have it. And supplies immediately started running short on some things. Wherever there was a large group of people assembled, it hadn't to be fewer than 60 people at a time. Well, that placed a hardship on the schools. The school immediately had to go out of the big full-blown classrooms, and also we had to practice getting out of our schoolrooms into the air raid shelter that had been built behind the school, and we had to get 500 boys underground in the shelter in 5 minutes. Because going on overhead at this time was what's called the Battle of Britain. And it was mainly German fighter planes and British fighter planes weaving in and out of the clouds across the sky, and there was a lot of excitement, and people were being injured, of course. But they decided then it was too dangerous for us to stay in my school. I haven't mentioned this, but from my bedroom window in the house that we bought over there, I could see the coast of France 21 miles away. So the Germans were that close, 21 miles away with the German army. It'd be kind of like if you were down here at St. John's and the German army was in Livonia. That's about the distance that the enemy was. But in between was the English Channel. Thank goodness for the English Channel. It kept the Napoleon's army away, and it was going to keep Hitler's army away. The war turned bad. The Germans burst through the Low Countries, Belgium and Holland, and came right up to the English Channel. And there was the Battle of Dunkirk. Probably some of you have seen that. It's a wonderful, true depiction of the Battle of Dunkirk. The British Army had to leave the continent and get home to England, and as much of the French army as they could, they went with them. For us boys, they decided that we should leave the area. It was too dangerous. So they loaded us, about 350 decided to go, and they took us to a town in Wales. Now, I had not ever heard of a country called Wales. Whales to me were what swallowed Jonah. That was a whale to me, but the people in Wales were fantastic. A train pulled in with 350 boys on it. There were crowds of people there waiting, and after a brief medical exam and a meal fed, the Welsh people took us to their homes. Wonderful, wonderful people. They didn't know any of us. The fact was many of them spoke a different language, Welsh. And some of our boys were actually billeted with families that only spoke Welsh, which was interesting for them. Luckily, I was billeted with a very wonderful couple. Let's see, I want to click past where am I? On that now. Oh, that was the Battle of Britain. That was when I was talking about the fighters weaving around up in the sky. So this next picture, those two ladies, they were sisters. One was a school teacher, the other one looked after the house. They had never been married. They had children in the other parts of the family, but to me, I was a little over 10 years old. They took me in, and I lived with them for the next 4 years. Lived away from my family, although I'd go home on holidays. So I was allowed to go back to celebrate holidays with them. But the couple of ladies were fantastic. When Marianne died, this is my wife later on in years, we'd travel to England. We'd always go and visit these two ladies. And I'm still in touch with members of the family. I call them regularly, about once every month, to let them know that I'm still alive. But they were wonderful to see. Now, we needed a building, so the Welsh made room for us in this building. It's called Cyfarthfa Castle. It had originally been one man's home, but at the time that I was there, the part of the building closest to the picture here was the boys' school for Welsh secondary school boys. The other end of the building was the girls' secondary school, and in the middle was a art gallery and the county museum. That'll give you an idea of the size of the building. It's a huge building, and they found enough rooms in it to accommodate my school. So we settled in, and the boys, a lot of them were very homesick, as I was. So the masters, our teachers, would try to get us together in just bunches of English boys. We loved the Welsh, but we wanted to be English, continue to be English. And this picture, you got this one up? Yep. You're doing a wonderful job clicking. You're a much better job than I am speaking. I'm all right. The picture, the master in the back was Mr. Ellis. The boy to his right was Michael Flavin, one of the boys in my class. He became a Roman Catholic priest, as a matter of fact. Right in front of him is the class clown. There's one in every class. And next to him, the studious-looking lad. That was Ken Miles. He was, for a short time, my roommate. But he had to leave the school. He couldn't keep his grades up, so he left. Next to him, of course, to the left of him is me. And then in the back, you can just see the top of the head of Hans Cohen. Hans Cohen was a Jewish boy. He and his mother fled Nazi Germany before the war, and an English family had taken them in, and he was in our school. Now the raids on London were daily, or I should say nightly. The Germans decided that London should be destroyed, and they started to bomb it. And so the first Christmas I was away, I wanted to go home. We had arrived in Wales in June, and December was coming, and I begged and begged my parents that I wanted to go home for Christmas. So they sent me the train fare, and I bought my ticket and took the train to London, right into the heart of the Blitz. My parents lived in the West End of London. My dad was working for the time in a civilian capacity with the Royal Army Medical Corps, and the Medical Corps furnished air raid shelters for the families that were working for them. So we got to be safe at night. I remember one night the sirens went off and bombing started, and the whole of the East End of London, we lived in the West End, the whole of the East End of London was on fire. That was December the 29th, 1940, was the second time that London burned. They burned in 1666. This was 1949. Anyway, the whole of London was on fire. And after the winter holidays came to an end, I had to go back to Wales, and I really didn't want to go and leave my parents in such a dangerous position. But I went back to Wales. My mother and I had to go from our East End, from our West End to the train that was going to take me back to Wales. But the roads were all blown up and the trains weren't running, and finally I did get back to Wales. And I went back a couple of times again on holiday to live with my parents in England, in London. There were large underground shelters, and you probably know about the underground system in England, underground trains, called the Tube. Well, the people would sleep. This next picture, the people are sleeping, in the underground station, in this case. And they could sleep right there on the rails because the trains didn't run at night, so the rails were safe. My parents, as I say, we had shelters at the school when my dad was working for the RAMC. The night of the December 29th, when London burned, this is the famous picture that you see often. That's St. Paul's Cathedral, surrounded by fires. This cathedral was slightly damaged. Up on the roof there was some fire, but the building itself was hardly damaged at all, which was wonderful considering the amount of bombing that went on. My parents finally, the Americans started to come over. They had finally declared war on Germany also, and we started getting American troops in about 42, I think it was. And so the English stopped regarding us as aliens and said, "You're Americans, like all these young men coming over here." And my parents were allowed to go back to our place down in Kent, where we had been living. I'm sorry, I'm a little slow here. My dad, when he got back down to our place in Kent, decided he'd better do something to contribute to the war effort, so he decided to raise chickens. And he built chicken houses and had all these young chickens come in, and had hundreds of them. And so everything was fine, except one day the German dive bombers, the Ju-87, I think it was, came in, a bunch of them, and it missed the airport that they were trying to bomb, and instead put 8 bombs in our property, all around our house. Needless to say, the house was damaged, all the windows were blown out, the roofs were damaged. But it could be repaired, and it was repaired. But the poor chickens, very few of them survived. Those that did only stayed alive for a few days. Chickens are rather fragile things, apparently. They didn't like the exploding bombs. We weren't too fond of them either. But 8 bombs fell on my parents' property. And so my dad got the idea, well, he'll repair one of these buildings and start over. So he was out repairing a building, and my mother called him in for lunch, and he went inside. And they no sooner sat down than there was a loud explosion, and the building my father had been repairing was blown to pieces.
Wow.
Apparently there was one bomb that didn't explode. It was a delayed action bomb. And had my dad been there, he would not have survived. Delayed action bombs were a problem. One day my grandmother answered the door, and the big Bobby's standing there. "I'm sorry, ma'am, lady, but I've got to ask you to leave. There's a unexploded bomb right across the road. The lads is going to come and dig it out, but while they're doing that, it might go off, so we want you to move to a safe place." Well, my grandmother said, "I lived in this house when the Kaiser's Zeppelins bombed us in the First World War. I'm not going anywhere." She didn't. They dug it up. It didn't explode. And Bobby comes back, knocks on the door, and he says, "You're all right, ladies, but how's about a cup of tea?" During the summer break, I would go home from school, And when I was old enough, I'd get to work in the neighboring farms. All the farm workers, of course, had gone off to war, and so it was difficult getting the work done. And they had what they called land army girls. They were young women who lived in the city and didn't know much about the country, but they came out anyway and helped work on the fields. We had them around our area. One day, I had been out working in the fields, and there was an anti-aircraft gun and crew right across the road from us. And as I was walking home, one of the crew members says, "What you been doing, Mike?" Well, I had been helping the neighbor. After they cut the grain, it would be tied in bundles and laying on the ground, and it had to be picked up, and they would stack the bundles up against each other to keep them dry. And I had been doing that. The bundles were called shooks or shocks, and so it was. The job was called shocking up. Well, I walked past the gun sight, and the lad said, "What you been doing, Mike?" I said, "I've been shocking up with the land girls." Ever after that, I was tagged. In addition to the bombing, the Germans had big artillery guns that they brought up out of the French coast. As I say, it was 21 miles across, so they would fire across the channel into the town where my school was, and we were suffering that kind of damage on top of everything else. And the last shell that was fired from France when the war was coming to an end hit my school. This picture is the school library and the headmaster's study were taken out. Luckily, there was nobody in the building at the time. My dad had been there, but he had left. The next thing that the Germans did, they decided that bombing wasn't bad enough. They could do better with a new kind of weapon. It was called a V1 bomb. This is a picture of what they looked. They were like a small airplane. There was no pilot in them. They would be fired off of the coast of France, aimed at London, and a lot of them didn't make it across the channel. Many of them did and landed in London. I remember one day I was riding along on my bicycle and I heard one of these things coming. They had a characteristic sound. You knew exactly what they were. They had kind of rumbled. And I heard this thing coming, and all I could think of was pedal faster, pedal faster. Of course, he's traveling about 400 miles an hour. But in all, they sent over 6,000 of these things. And a lot of them, as I say, didn't make it, but a lot of them made it into London, and the casualties in London were increased once again. The flying bombs attacked until the invading Allied armies came up the coast of France and captured the launching sites, and that put an end to the V1s. But then along came the Germans with a new weapon called the V2, and it looks a lot like a characteristic ballistics missile that we're familiar with, but this one was, again, pointed at London, fired up. It traveled way up into the stratosphere, tipped over, and dove down straight into the heart of London. They I forget how many of these things they sent over. 1,300 of these were launched into the London area. Only 517 got there, but they killed over 2,700 people just from that weapon alone. I'm sorry, I'm slowing down. I'm trying to hold it together here. In the meantime, at school, they settled down. As I say, the Allies came up the coast of France and got rid of the launching sites. And so they decided, well, the school could come back to its own buildings back in the Folkestone area. And we came back. Of the 350 so boys that went, that stayed on through the 4 or 5 years during the evacuation period, I was one of 8 originals. I had been on the original train that went to take the boys to Wales. We got things going again in the school, slowly but surely, and I sat my exams for the University of London to matriculate, and I managed to pass that. And my parents then decided, well, let's go back to America. Now my 3 brothers were all older than I, so they were all in the armed forces. My oldest brother had gone back to England, but he joined the American Army and was brought over with the American forces. And with the Americans, he was at D-Day plus 6 or 7. The next one, the tall one, Barney, he joined the RAF, and he served all through the Middle East, through Iraq, Iran, Egypt, Palestine, Libya, into the invasion of Italy. And when he was in the invasion of Italy, somehow he managed to switch over from the RAF to the American Air Force. And so he came back with the American forces. The other one, the third brother, was with the 8th Air Force all during the war, and he came back. All 3 of them got back to America before the rest of us, my parents and I. They were all there waiting for us when we got back. This picture, do you have this one? Oh, yeah, that's coming up.
I don't have this one.
Oh, I have a picture. It was my last day in Wales before leaving. So that my parents decided to come back to America, and although there was no ready transportation, the transports were all bringing troops back from Europe, and many of those were getting ready to be sent to the Far East because the war against Japan was still on. But my 3 brothers, the oldest one, was waiting for us when we got back to America. We went back on a Swedish liner, the MS Gripsholm, which had been a hospital ship all during the war, was painted white with red crosses on so the submarines wouldn't shoot it down. And on board the ship with my parents and I were a whole gaggle of young English brides that had married American soldiers, and the soldiers had gone home with the army, and the brides were following them. So we had a boatload of war brides. And so finally we got back to America, and it was good to see the old lady here. And we came in, and the next picture is the first time in 7 years that we, of all 6 of us, had gotten together again. My dad, my mother, my oldest brother, the one that was in D-Day plus 6 or 7. Next one had been in the RAF and switched over to the Americans. The next one was with the 8th Air Force. And the last one was the handsome man in the family. So that is a story of about 7 years of my life. I learned a tremendous amount, even if it was just a pound, to be able to multiply pounds, shillings, and pence.
Yes.
The education was very strict. For example, in the years that I was at the school, I took physics and chemistry, and I had French and Latin. I had Old English. Anybody knows Old English? Quando te prele with the shore sota, the droch the march, pers into the roted bar the every vein in switch liquor, of which engendered is the floor. That's Chaucer. Then, of course, lots of Latin. Originally, the grammar schools were designed to teach Latin, because if you could read and write Latin, you could get a job in the church, in the law, in medicine. All of those things, important things, were conducted in Latin. So there was a heavy emphasis still in my school in Latin. Nox erit piens nemques memenas voluptas, cum foribus patries egre barmans. We'd have pages and pages of Ovid or Livid or whatever to translate, and we had to translate both ways, from English to Latin and Latin to English. And we had art classes, and for a short time we had woodworking, we had metalworking. It was a very broad spectrum of lessons that we had. History, French was written and spoken in our exams. So I was very proud of my English schooling, and it has stood me in many ways. A lot of the stuff was at the time considered to be useless, but it's the only way you could get the paperwork that you needed to go to London, to the university. So that's about 10 years of my life. Since then, many things have happened, and if you want to take another day or two, I'll tell you all about that too.
Yeah.